about how to photograph a layout, how to get it ready for layout. And then one of the things we do at the museum is we have videos that we play for visitors, and they really appreciate that. We have video cameras that will actually show trains running by, and in some cases, actually camera cars that they push around, and you look like what it looks like when you're in the locomotive or the car. So model railroad photography. Why do we photograph our models and our layout? There's a lot of reasons to do that. We record our work. It shows our progress as we go along, kind of record photos, share our work with others. A lot of times we want to tell and show people what we do. Useful for educational purposes, things like clinics and things like that. Necessary for publication or online posting. It's a great modeling tool. If you want to talk about the stuff we've been talking about most of today, when you look at a photograph, you'll spot stuff wrong really fast. Cameras do not lie when you're looking at things. It's fun. You'd be surprised. It could even become a hobby by itself. So here's some examples, and I'll go through some of these fairly quickly. It's not to explain all of these things, but here's examples of documenting work. This is what the museum would look like roughly 10 years ago. It's kind of amazing when you look at that over time, when you get to what you are today. Some of the early scenery and things like that. Here's an example, and Jay will know some of this part fairly well, is the Sanbornville section that Dave Sias was involved with as well with planning this out. Those are some of the early days when we were laying that in. So that's how you document your work. This is some of the finished areas. So this is an area where you can share that. Gets to the point you never know when you share a photo like that where it's going to end up. This particular photo ended up in the town of Wakefield financial report for a couple of years ago. So here's an example of that same corner. So here's a modeling tool, and if you look a little close, you start seeing things in here like there's gaps. Some of the posts that are showing. I noticed this little blue speck on the end of my turntable bridge. There's a piece of lint and dirt that was on the end of it. You start noticing that kind of stuff when you look at these photos. Here's a little closer up. Sometimes you'll start taking a photo and you'll say, oh my goodness, this might be a good one for publication. Or you see as a photo contest. There's a possibility, it's got the composition is good. And you say, oh, that might be a very good candidate for that. So in some cases I wouldn't consider myself a professional photographer by any means, but I have been fortunate and had a couple of my photos appear on covers of magazines. Coupler and the NMRA magazine. In fact, these were an article Dave Sias wrote, and I took the photographs at his house for it. So I have that actual magazine here if someone wants to look at it. And then the fun and the hobby part, you can enter into a photo contest. I did this in Newport, Rhode Island, and at first I thought it was a pretty good photo, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's not getting first place or second or whatever. It turns out it took best of show, which I'm like, oh my goodness, I almost fell down. It's unusual for a model photo to end up best of show, but you look at some of the composition, you can probably, the reflection, the scenery, and things like that. So the judges for the photo contest liked it. That's really an artistic part you were talking about, but you got to have stuff correct. Here's some other photos to share. A lot of times I'll take a photo of something on a layout, and it's someone who built the model, and you give it to them. Or send it to them so they have a record of what they built or worked on. In this case, those couple cars were also built from us by Dave Emery. So there's cases where you take a photo and you can share them with people. There's one model that Dave Sias had made. It was along the way as well. It's the same kind of thing. So I don't want to get into too much of the basic the photography things, but you've got to understand the basics to be able to get your layout ready to photograph and to take photos that are reasonable. Some of the stuff was mentioned a little bit today, but so I want to quickly go over the background fundamentals, the equipment evolution that's occurred. Things have changed a lot in the times I've been in the hobby 55 years, and things have changed tremendously. Some of the key concepts when you're photographing a model railroad. And then I'm going to talk about layout design and setup considerations. And then the layout video options, what camera types, how you're going to use them, how you can apply these camera, and how to actually build camera cars. Okay, so the basic part, models and model railroads do not photograph like prototypes. When you take a real life photo or something, it's usually quite a bit easier. And there's reasons for that. I've seen cases where professional photographers will come into a model railroad layout, grab a camera and start snapping pictures. And the ones I always laugh at are newspaper people. You know, the ones that take pictures of fires and car accidents and things like that. They come to a model railroad, they have no clue. They put the camera, they take a picture, the picture's awful. And you probably don't know why. I'm like, it's not the same thing. Part of it is because the camera gets fooled. It doesn't know it's looking at a model. It thinks it's looking at a railroad car that's 100 feet away when it's actually only 9 inches away. So related to, and automatic cameras are great. They've improved things tremendously, but they are also challenged by some of these things on our models. So the things around, the lighting, composition, and exposure are some of the fundamentals there. On a model railroad, our biggest problem is this depth of field. When you're trying to focus on something, you used to be able to change the lenses and, variety of things like that. You'd play with the film, you get your camera settings, but it really comes down to the aperture and the shutter speed to try to get this depth of field. And what I mean by depth of field, we've all seen this where you're looking at something, and depending how it's composed, the front stuff is blurry, the middle is perfectly sharp, and you just go a little bit beyond and it's blurry, and the background is all blurry. So you've only got a small portion of your photograph that's in focus. And there's ways of improving that. Okay, there's a little bit of the basics. I thought this was kind of funny. I still have all this equipment. I'm like, oh, the good old days. My old Minolta X700. It wasn't autofocus. I took lots and lots of pictures with this camera. Ironically, I still have 6 or 7 rolls of film. For some reason, I haven't gotten enchanted with it anymore. But some of the equipment you see related to that is a little closer. There's a lot of decisions you have to make. Were you going to use color print film, black and white film? Were you going to use slides? What speed film are you going to use? 64, 100, 200, 1,000. Then you got to get it processed. All of these kind of things. So took good pictures, and then you have all your settings you got to deal with that I was just talking about. And the things you saw in there, like what lens and what lens setting and the manual settings and the f-stops and, what are all these things over here? You look at this, your shutter speed, the filters, even more things you could put on the front of the camera. Then finally you'd be able to focus and shoot. So the manuals on these cameras have these little things to kind of help us along. And that kind of explains a little bit, and this looks by itself looks fairly complicated. You got your subject. Sometimes the subject is dark and sometimes it's bright. So you end up, people usually use a meter, or they build a meter in the camera, and then you use your film speed, you set that. Then you calculate all this stuff and you figure out what you're going to do for the exposure. So then you get your shutter speed, you get less light, more light. You get the aperture, you have a larger opening, a smaller, which let in more light and things like that. So when you're doing a model railroad, here's the things that go up, where we're up against. You've got, our models are inside. It means they're low light automatically. I don't care what kind of lights you put on it, it's not like the sunlight. You put a model in the parking lot, you're not going to have a lighting problem necessarily. Models are often dark. We've got small things, and the locomotives are black, or, under it, they're small and they're detailed, harder to capture because those details are kind of hard to pick up. Our models are 3-dimensional. Now, a lot of things are 3-dimensional, but what I mean is if you're taking a picture of a mountain, it's a lot easier than taking a picture of a model like that. Our models are often not accessible. To try to take a picture of a model, or especially on a layout, you might want to capture something that's 2 feet away from the edge of the layout. It's a little hard to get to. And sometimes our models are in motion. Don't ever try to take a detailed photo of a moving locomotive. You don't have a chance. You're going to get a blur. So the depth of field challenge, and I'm not going to try to fully explain that. We don't have enough time. But you're basically trying to get a small aperture. You used to make pinhole cameras. So that's to get that much focal distance as you can. You want to show a slow shutter speed, okay? So a tripod is almost a must. You try to take a picture with a free-holding camera, you're going to have a hard time. It's going to naturally be blurry. You're hurting yourself. And then the artificial lighting, you want to try to get the color temperature right on that. And Tage has talked about that before when you're even designing your layout. So basically, what's the complicated part is you'd like to be up here. You'd like to be down here. Well, they're kind of far apart. So ideally, you're trying to get your better exposure in here. So that's the challenge you're into. So the equipment has changed. This is the camera I use today. It's actually about 17 years old. It's an 8.1. It does not have autofocus. It doesn't have interchangeable lenses. It's not an SLR. But I've taken lots of photos with this, and it does okay. It's still doing okay today. There's better stuff around. Now there's no more film. You use storage media. A lot of automatic settings, but you got to also pick what you pick on these settings. You look on the top of the camera, you got P, S, A, M. Some are better than others. I found using the aperture priority is the best to get your improved depth of field, if nothing else. A lot of people use autofocus. A lot of the cameras today are that. And then you have multiple zooms that are built in. You got a mechanical zoom where the lens extends, and you've got an electrical zoom. Now things have really changed. Now we have smartphone cameras, and everyone can have a high-powered camera in their pocket. It's fully automatic. In most cases, you grab your thing, you push the button, and you think you got a good picture. There are a lot of things on those cell phone cameras that they're good for. Portraits, fantastic. Things like that. Other things, taking photos of models, are still a bit tricky with them. Like even holding them, they're much better than the older cameras, and they always get better with every new version. Okay, they can, minimal knowledge, okay? But those old issues we were talking about are still there, even with a cell phone. So here's what you can do on your layout to make things a little better for you and take better photos. Sometimes
the cell phone cameras, do any of them have the ability to change
the equivalent of it. Yep. You get a lot of times you never get to that part, but there's levels in there that you can make adjustments. But that's not most of the time. I use it the way it is. I use it for what it does best, and then I grab my other camera for other things. But I have not learned all those finer points. People that take photos say if you put your cell phone on portrait, you're going to get much better pictures, but usually of people. It actually adjusts the lighting and the film, all of that stuff. There's a lot you can do with it, but there's stuff to learn. Okay, and I'm not going to try to teach anybody how to adjust a cell phone camera to take pictures. But going back to the layout part, this is a scene, and these are the kind of things you can end up doing to help you a lot. Already having a photo backdrop helps tremendously when you're taking pictures. And then you can design elements of your layout, and I like to see if you're going to design a layout that's going to be photogenic, if you want to imagine such a thing. You make it so that there's more scenery and less track. A layout with a lot of track doesn't photograph very well. You can. I'm not saying you can't get pictures of it, but here's a case where intentionally this causeway and this lake pond was put in there to get nice reflective pictures. So here's that picture showing you again with that reflection in there. So you can see how those elements came into place. And the photo is kind of parallel to the camera, which also helps with that depth of field. Sometimes you can put stuff in the front or the back, and that also can make things interesting. Some of the things to point out over here is, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Sometimes you get colors that are extremely bright, and that can sometimes be distracting. Here's the question about that depth of field I was just talking about. It might be a little hard to see unless you're actually looking at the photo, like on the computer, and looking at it a little close. Where you can see clear differences between, when I was talking about the depth of field here, this stuff is reasonably in focus. That car is definitely not. And then that wagon doesn't have a chance. But you can also see that this stuff is close to us and moving away from us. That's a hard situation to try to photograph. You know, it's like trying to take a picture of a train when the engine is in front and you're trying to get a picture of the caboose at the same time. Now, there's fancy software that you can take multiple pictures and they focus on the front, the middle, and the back. They merge all three pictures together, and I'm not talking about that. That's, no, it's okay. You could do that if you want, but it's a little more than what I want to do right now. So you can see over here with this picture in different settings, you can see now, you know, and like I said, you're looking at it close. This is a lot more focus all the way through here than it was before, and that has to do with the settings of the camera. Here's the same picture with a cell phone. Same conditions. I grabbed the cell phone and took a picture. Now, what I find is interesting is most of it is blurry, but there's some stuff that is fairly focused, but it depends where the phone is trying to focus on. Okay. Now, it didn't do very well here. As I go through this, some places the cell phone did better than the camera. So it all depends what you're doing, okay? This one here, I don't really like these results too much. I try to change something. It looks like there's an issue with lighting and things like that. So here's the color temperature issue that, you know, Tej has talked about this before. You ever see pictures and sometimes they look yellowish and sometimes they look more white? This one here happens to look blue right now, but it was more whitish when I put this together. So here's a case where the temperature of the lighting was different. I used a photo lamp to take this photo, and I used the room lights to take that photo. The room lights, we have 4000K lights in them, LED, and the photo lamp I have is an older one, is 3200. So just by having a different light, you can see the difference in the photo. Yeah, what I'm trying to do over here is to show some of the things you get into, because those two photos I just showed you are unedited. That's as the camera produced them. I just put them in the computer and I only shrunk the size so that it wouldn't take as much space. That's the only thing I did. I didn't edit any, no improvements, enhancements, or anything. Okay, so, but you're right. It's the same thing when you used to do color print film. You go to the Photoshop developing place, the processing, and they often would mess up your pictures because they think they were improving them. They would change all this color balance and all of that and say, oh, look, a lovely picture. Well, that's not what I wanted, but that's okay. But when you did slide film, you had no choice. That was what you shot, was what you got.
Get the right color.
Exactly. A lot of times people that build models and they're really particular about prototype colors and all that will have the same kind of light on their workbench as they have on their layout. They do that intentionally. I like to work with, I've used quite a few OT lights. They have a daylight or a natural light color in them. Some of the LEDs, you get a lot more choices now. So you can match it even with different kinds of light fixtures. Now, we've talked about this kind of things before. The examples that I was just showing you, there's a lot of a range that you're talking about here, but that photo lamp I was using was 3200 warm. And then the layout light that we have overhead are LEDs, those are 4000. And normally daylight, like you see in sunlight, is usually around 5000. My home layout, I've got 4500. We went for 4000 on the museum layout because we had already gotten everything used to 3200. Basically, the kind of lights we were using were mostly incandescent. So it's the same kind of thing you were just talking about. The scenery was already painted for a certain temperature light, the trees and all of that. So if all of a sudden you change the lighting, you kind of have a different thing already. So it's a thing, you just change your lights. If you did something with incandescent, like build a model, and then you show it in daylight, it'll look different. So there was concerns about that. So here's another cell phone picture. Trying to show some of that lighting that's there. Here's the effect with the light again, a little closer. Again, you can see the difference in the temperature of the lights. To me, ironically, this is the layout natural room lighting. And other than it being dark in here, the colors look more natural to me, more like daylight. The same kind of thing happens when you use LEDs or things inside your structures. You know, you have the bright white versus the yellowish, you know, yeah, well, I was only using one lamp, you know, and I was trying to prepare for this. There's a lot of, I told Jay one time, I says, trying to take bad pictures. You know, you go in your collection and sometimes it's hard to do, but, huh? No, I'm not saying well, many pictures are good. I'm just saying when you're trying to make a point, a lot of times you're trying to eliminate those kind of things. And here, I only used one light, and I should have used two. That would have filled in more. So here's another chart of that kind of thing we're just talking about. So these are old-fashioned photo flood lamps that I was using, and you see the temperature. Okay, here's with a cell phone. That's not too bad. You've got the same kind of thing with the lighting again, but you'll notice that some of the things that happen here, you know, like these bright lines that come in, that's the thing I was talking about, dark and white areas. Trying to get that balance can sometimes be pretty tricky. That's where the extra lighting comes in. From what I understand, my floodlights are obviously dated. People have nice LED lights now that you can get the different temperatures. I actually install lights in my layout room, not all of them, that are actually adjustable. You can have an LED and you can actually change the temperature on the light fixture, which is kind of neat. I don't have it in the whole room, but here's some of the things with colors. Some of these, when you try to take a realistic photograph, some of these quick scenery techniques you use kind of like look like colored marshmallows and things like that on the layout. So our layout in Heritage Park has been accepted and will be photographed. And I've already gotten comments about trying to get some of these things out of there or fix them as whatever we can. So here's another example of that. You know, you can see these things over here. So I'm going to keep moving along. There's some parts of this are beautiful, though. You know, there's combinations of things. And then all of a sudden you got one or two things in here that kind of spoil the effect. So it's sort of like you're modeling. It also works for scenery. You can look at a photo and say, what's wrong with this picture? And those are the things you should probably pluck off and replace with something else. Or weather or highlight or something. Okay? Shadows, watch out for shadows. In real life, there are no shadows on the sky. I've never seen a building that threw a shadow on the sky. Okay, so you can see over here, there's shadows here, and there's a shadow back here. You can try to disguise this stuff the best you can. It happens with trees. Sometimes you can move the tree around. And I think the discussion this morning about the museum and Seashore Trolley Museum with those overhead lamps, watch out for the shadows, okay? Because I watched all of this stuff when you put a tree in and all of that. And one day, a little quick thing, they came in, somebody wanted to take snapshots of the layouts when I wasn't there. There were some of the people in town. And they decided that their lighting wasn't good enough, so they moved the overhead lamps. You know how you have those track lights? They unlocked them and moved them so their picture would come out better. And when I got there, I'm like, what happened here? Because now there were shadows showing up on the walls and the paint didn't look right and all kinds of stuff. So it took a while to get that back. So placement of your lights will solve some of that. This one here was easy. I buried the shadow behind the angle that I took the picture with. Made that shadow go away, but I talked about this a little bit before. This will show up some of the things that you see that need to be improved on this, by the way, is nothing wrong with the model. It just hasn't been set into the ground yet. Okay, that's just stuff you see. I'm like, you know, we still got to chop in the foundation and all of that. Here's a variety of things. Here's the colors again. This was an early area that we modeled. So this is And this would be like a depth of field issue, but it's kind of a nice how you see that area looking through there. But watch the colors again. See all this stuff hanging over there? It just doesn't really look really realistic to match the rest of the scene here.